What does it take to name a brand for a market you've never stepped into? This is How the World Names. Conversations with members of We Are Naming, the global network of experts shaping the future of international brand development. In this series, we explore what's wonderful and weird about the languages, cultures, and countries we represent. Hello, and welcome to How the World Names. I'm Caitlin Barrett. I am the U.S. partner of We Are Naming, and I am joined today by our partner in the U.K., Pete Dewar. How are you, Pete?
I'm very well. Yeah, good to see you, Caitlin. How are you doing?
Great to see you. I am starting all of these interviews by asking our guests to tell us a little bit about how they work, their naming practice. You definitely have a different sort of agency studio practice than a lot of us, and I would love for you to tell me a little bit about your work.
Sure. Well, I work for a business called The Clearing, which is a branding agency in London. It's one I founded with a couple of others 15 years ago. So we're full service. I guess we talk about working at the intersection of brand, technology, and culture. So we do everything you'd expect a branding agency to do, of which naming is a really core part of what we do. But unlike some of the other kind of We Are Naming members, I'm not doing naming day in, day out. It's part of what we do, and we've got a team of writers here who obviously support in that. But language is a really core discipline at the Clearing. It was one of our sort of founding disciplines, if you like, unlike a lot of branding agencies. And so it feels like naming, language, linguistics kind of runs deep within the agency. Work with all sorts of different types of clients. We're not sort of sector specific. We do a lot in sport, we do a lot in tech, quite a lot in retail, a lot in not for profits, but really, I guess it's any brand which is trying to shift the needle in some way. Then we're open to having a conversation with them.
Yeah, I love your team. Your team helps all of us a lot. We're all very appreciative of everyone.
We're always busy with UK English language checks. Yeah.
So you wrote a report called "What You Need to Know About Naming in the UK," and we're going to talk about it today. And you and I suffer many of the same challenges that come from English. And one of the first things you talk about in the report is you say that English is both a blessing and a curse. Let's talk about what you mean by that, because I think a lot of people will really connect with that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's exactly what that sounds. It's a double-edged sword, and I think English is still the de facto kind of global language, if you like. I feel a bit uncomfortable saying that, but there's a reality, and certainly in kind of business and brands, I think that still exists to a large degree. And so I think it feels like sort of everyone has a stake in it. Everyone has a point of view. Everyone can use it, which is, as I say, there's good and bad things about that. And so I think, when you think about that sort of the good elements, the blessing, if you like, look, cultural reach is great. It's widely understood globally. So, if you create a well-chosen English name, then it can instantly feel international. And that's really great. And we, as native English speakers, understand all the nuance, can kind of sift through those sort of elements of meaning, if you like, to find kind of the right spot to communicate what we want to. So that's great. English has just an unbelievable depth of vocabulary as well, which gives us incredible richness. The ability to nuance meaning. If you think just about how many different words there are, to talk about, a home or a house, for instance, the kind of different flavors of it. If you put that into a name, then you can get some real subtlety out of that. And I'm sure other languages have similar kinds of things, but English particularly feels like it's rich. And I think you have a lot of creative freedom as well within English. The quirks of English is a sort of slightly chaotic language from a grammatical perspective, and its quirks with pronunciation and spelling and so on allows you actually quite a lot of scope for blending, compounding, inventing words without breaking grammar rules. You think about sort of the likes of Pinterest, Snapchat, YouTube, Google. They sound completely natural in English, although they're obviously kind of neologisms effectively. So that's all brilliant, great. I think the curse bit is it feels quite overcrowded as a space. So you kind of, if I'm just naming something for a UK market, kind of it feels like something like it's like everybody else has been naming the same thing in different markets, but because they want kind of global reach or international appeal, they might use English. So you think you've come up with the most original or clever name, and then you find it's gone. I mean, how many times? Look, that happens in every market, right? But it does feel particularly like that happens in English. So that can be sort of frustrating, disheartening at times. But it's it's one of the things that we sort of work around. I think there the other sort of tricky things with English is a lot of homonyms as well, so that can cause confusion, unintentional double meanings. You think about Bare Essentials, the beauty brand. Well, BARE is fine, but it could be BEAR, communicate something completely different. But if you hear it, and again, I realise there's similarities in other languages, but it feels like there are a lot in English, and I think I guess the other element is there's unintended consequences often. English has, I think, British English particularly, and I'm saying this from the perspective of doing a lot of language checks for other We Are Naming members around the world. We've got an enormous amount of slang in British English,
You do,
which
you do.
I
We
think
do
can be
too,
shock.
and our slangs do not complement each other. You have
No,
caught
no, they
me
don't.
almost wanting to say some really weird things, and I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it works the other way as well. But the amount of time, pretty much every language check we do, there will be some unintended, unexpected, sexual, drunken innuendo or something like that within there. And that it sort of makes me aware that, guys, there's so much nuance out there. I mean, I think in English, you can pretty much turn any word into a word for drunkenness, for instance, and it'll sound fine. And it goes back to the creative freedom point that because the language, you can manipulate English so much that something can sound absolutely fine, but in the wrong context, then actually it can be sort of quite inappropriate or even dangerous. So I think from a naming perspective, when we're creating global name, we're not just sort of competing with ourselves and other English speaking markets. We're sort of competing with everyone, and so yeah, that's I guess that double edged sword element.
So one of the other things that you talk about, which is going to bring us to a naming case that's been one of my favorites over the last couple of years, is as brands, seek to modernize. Maybe they've got a really
Mm-hmm.
heavy name. We've seen a lot of brands over the last couple of decades kind of come away from these names that were long and institutional, and maybe they felt kept them from seeming modern or relevant in younger generations' lives. And sometimes there's some very successful cases of that, just kind of simplifying down to the essence of what you want to say. But you flag in your report my favorite, which is the Aberdeen case. Can you
Yeah.
talk about how their name started, what they did, and what they did more recently to change course?
Yeah. Okay. So a little bit of context if you don't know this story. So imagine you're a 200-year-old financial giant. You're changing something. You're changing your name to something that kind of looks like a mistake, a typo. You spend years defending it, and then quietly you change it back to probably what it should have been in the first place. That's basically the story of Aberdeen and Standard Life Aberdeen becoming Aberdeen. And when we say Aberdeen, we're not saying it like the city. We're saying the letters ABRDN without any of the E's in it. So, bit of background: 2017, Standard Life and Aberdeen Asset Management, two different firms, merged. They became Standard Life Aberdeen. Fast forward a couple of years, 2021, they sold part of the business and the Standard Life name to another financial services brand. So they needed a unique ownable name. They couldn't use the Standard Life name. But they didn't want to use the Aberdeen name either. There's a city in Scotland called Aberdeen. That's where it came from. So it was potentially tricky from an IP perspective. And so their brand agency created this neologism, this new version of Aberdeen, which effectively had no vowels other than the first A. Which when they launched, they had to spell out it's pronounced Aberdeen, which starts to give you a bit of a sense of
Mhm.
this might be a problem for them. So look, it got pilloried in the media. Public reaction became a bit of a laughing stock for missing vowels. People were deliberately mispronunciating it, saying, "Oh, well, it could mean a burden,"
A
for
burden. I mean,
instance.
it
Yeah,
does look like that. If you don't know the
yeah. If you want
Aberdeen
to put vowels
origin,
in, they
it'd
don't
be
have to
like
be e's. You can mix it up a
it
little
could be
bit.
whatever you want.
Yeah, it was I think perceived as just being a bit kind of trendy for trendy's sake, and a little bit more style over substance. they had to persistently defend it. Not a great sign. And that was sort of the court of public opinion and media, if you like. I think in the industry, it kind of got lambasted as well, but maybe less about kind of making fun of it. It was just seen as a bit of a mismatch between a brand that was really trying to present a sort of a radical kind of new textile, a bit like a Flickr or Tumblr or something like that, where you're losing vowels, with this sort of really rich heritage in sort of conservative financial services. And there was just a clash there ultimately. And I think the name became the story, overshadowing the actual change that they were trying to reflect in the first place. So that was the problem. They did this for a few years. They tried to defend it. They kept going. I think, fast forward to early this year, the name was still making more headlines than the performance of the business.
Yeah.
New CEO, new approach, and so the CEO
Mm.
effectively went, "Look, we've got to be pragmatic about this." Dropped Aberdeen, without the vowels, returned to Aberdeen with all its ease in full glory. Framing it as, "Look, we need to remove the distractions. We need to be pragmatic." I think I was reading up on this. Shares jumped about 10% on day one after that announcement,
Wow.
which suggests something.
Mm.
Relieved investors, if nothing else. And people saw it as a bit of a common sense move. So I think it's a bit of a lesson of just, look, a name can do so many things. You have to imbue it with meaning. You have to be really careful about how you build that meaning. And some of it will be assumed by people. Some of it you can frame it. But if you try too hard to explain, then you're just on the back foot straight away. And generally speaking, you don't want the name to be the story, particularly in a category like financial services, where I think trust, clarity are paramount. When you're explaining, that's not great. And I think you just have to match any piece of naming work that we do. We're trying to communicate what the business wants to project, what the brand wants to project, and you've just got to make sure that those things are really well aligned. So if you create a radical rebrand without a radical shift in customer experience, for instance, there's likely to be a dissonance there that's going to be problematic. So it's a cautionary tale, I
It's
think.
a great one. I couldn't believe I don't think obviously investors had a strong interest in the name change back, but I think namers probably had the second strongest interest in that name change back. All of us had been following that one so closely, and I was telling everyone in my life, Aberdeen changed their name back, and they're like, "What are you talking about? I don't care. I don't know about that." And I was like, "You have no idea." Very important story. But
Yeah, it's kind of difficult though, isn't it? Because I appreciate from the agency's perspective, they were trying to do something different. They were
yeah,
trying to shift the needle. They were trying to be brave, and all of those things are commendable. But I think probably there should have been somewhere along the line where we do so many language checks. I say we do so much sort of
yeah.
cultural exchange as a group within We Are Naming. You'd think somewhere along the line somebody might have gone, this might be problematic,
Yeah,
and
I mean, I
I
think
think
the two parts of it are we read it as a burden, and then just like for the nature of this company and the way they were
yeah,
going to bring the brand to life and the experience of it is this like disemboweled 2010 vibe sort of name, right, to serve them when you need to, as a
yeah,
financial services company, a lot of credibility, a lot of stability. Does it get us there? And I think something like just straight up Aberdeen does that probably a lot better. And
absolutely.
problems with geographic names, hard to defend. Everything comes with trade offs. Totally get that too. But you had some other examples in your report too that I think bring to life that same the right way to do that, and it's not the only way to do it, but of simplifying a longer name or a more descriptive name into something that's kind of owns a feeling or a concept a little bit better. Do you want to share those examples? Because I think they do a
Yeah,
really good
yeah. I
job
mean,
of
I,
doing
I,
that.
th- I think sometimes, and one of them in particular, it was kind of London's. Well, when newspapers were pervasive, there was a London evening newspaper called the Evening Standard. Everybody called it the Standard, and so actually, so they changed the name from the Evening Standard to the Standard. Became more digital anyway. That kind of felt like a natural leap. That it was almost, your audience had already made that change for you. All you were doing was kind of catching up with that. That's kind of an easy way to do it. The other example that we've got in the in the kind of report was TransferWise to Wise, and again, I mean, I guess they were expanding their services beyond just kind of transferring money, and it actually was about Wise gives you an opportunity to build more, knowledge, insight into your kind of brand story. It feels less functional and actually a bit more. I guess it gives you more room to breathe as an organization in terms of your products and services as well. So that felt like quite a neat, natural way of doing it, I think. So both of those worked really well for me.
And I think that that's a good transition into one of the next points in your report is sometimes we can choose names that like pin us really closely to a category or a point in time, and ultimately that can sound cheap, right? If TransferWise tried to stick with that name and they're doing so much more than, money transfers, transactions, you build into deeper financial services, people kind of, there's some limits there. And you point to a few styles that can feel really cheap to UK consumers. You have confused.com as the name, where you've got the .com as
Mm-hmm.
part of the name. Here we always point to 1-800-Flowers, where like it was novel at the time to be able to call and order flowers, but when we start ordering through different channels, not so good. My favorite is using numbers for words. Actually, this is a great example you have here, because not only does it use a number for a word, it shortens the word you to you. Phones for you. Phones,
Yeah.
number 4, the letter U. Um, and you point to right now we're seeing this with AI, using AI in the name. People are coining with it.
Yeah.
Dot AI as the name, not just the URL.
Yeah.
So talk to me about some of these traps that brands fall into
Mm,
that can kind of make them seem a little cheap, limit
mm.
kind of where they can go or what they can do with their brand, and maybe that's okay. Maybe sometimes cheap is kind of fun.
Yeah, look, I mean, if that's what you want to communicate, and I guess actually phones for you, that they probably did, but times change and times move on, as well. And I think names like that, particularly where you're sort of replacing, where you're using numerals to replace letters and so on, or contracting words, it can tap into just some quite specific kind of cultural and linguistic cues, particularly for British audience. And I think there's a huge association with sort of discount culture, sort of market trading, where you replace words with numerals. There's an association with kind of bargain shops, pound stores, and so on, sort of lower end high street retailers, and I'll say sort of markets. And I think they're trying to get an instant hit. They're trying to make things shorter, punchier, maybe convey a bit of a sense of informality. So using the number 4 instead of the word FOR, for, might suggest lower price. So a brand kind of appropriating that is automatically going to sound cheap. And as I say, phones for you, I'm sure they did it deliberately. You know,
Low
it
cost.
maybe makes it
Yeah.
feel a little bit more distinctive, or at the time. But it sort of also has a little bit of a sign of sort of social positioning in there, particularly in the UK. And I think the sort of a sense of class still exists that you don't see in higher end brands. Would never do something like that. They'll write that they'll lean on understatement and restraint. They'll have their names written out in full, whether they're longer, like a Fortnum and Mason, or even short, like Skype. But they don't kind of muck around with the words. And so I think it can sometimes seem a little bit cheap to do that, almost sort of sensationalist and mass market. And I think another thing driving that is sort of tabloid press in the UK. So we talked about them as being the red top. So newspapers or news outlets like the Sun, or the Daily Mirror or the Daily Sun, they would sort of create headlines, probably still do online now, that are trying to grab attention. They're trying to jump out, and they've only got a certain amount of space. So they will quite often use those sort of natural contractions, like numerals instead of letters, or the letter U instead of Y, just to kind of fit a space, to jump out, grab attention, but they kind of feel a little bit down market. And so I think all of these things kind of in a kind of way sort of contribute to that sense of actually it just feels a little bit cheap. And I think the .com at the end, or .a, or whatever it might be, is a similar kind of trope. It's just the sort of the digital version of it. It's kind of a type of signposting, say, hey, we're online. Yeah, but everybody is now.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so it kind of feels like calling that out just makes it look like, have you got nothing else to say?
Yeah.
And so again, it just feels like the brands then become a little bit sort of superficial, maybe even sort of paper thin, and there's no depth to them when they go down that route. So I think those are the sorts of things that I think we see, and so I mean we'd always unless that's a really sort of specific part of the brief. Probably try and steer away from that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's so funny because it sometimes can just be the disadvantage of being first to market. You have to explain what you do. People don't
Mhm.
know this yet.
Yeah.
And maybe you need to build confidence by explaining it. And once the category is established, maybe due to the hard work you did under that name, other people get to kind of slide in above you because you've built that credibility. And it can be really unfair. And you see, a lot of startups having to change their name. TransferWise, we'll go back to that. Great
Mhm.
example. Kind of changing the way people send money internationally. You only had a couple of players before that, and so yeah, you sometimes are just faced with the need to change that name to keep up with the market conditions. Even if you do it best, you did it first, you do it best. It puts brands sometimes in a very funny position. You also put in the example of Nasty Gal, and I
Yeah.
think that's a great example of being able to kind of play with tone
Mhm.
and kind of referencing a certain space in a way that totally fits the brand. We talk a little bit about Nasty Gal, about who they are and their position and maybe the minds of like UK consumers.
Yes, I guess fashion business, online fashion business, aimed at, I guess, a fashion savvy, slightly rebellious audience, younger audience. I think the interesting thing there, it might sound cheap to probably somebody like me who isn't their target audience.
You're not wearing head to toe
Newsflash.
Nasty Gal today.
Yeah, my daughters might be, but it knows it's provocative. It feels like it's intentional and confident and kind of deliberate, and it's absolutely sort of zoning in on that niche audience who they're, well, not niche audience, but their particular niche. And that audience is going to identify that. It's going to see a little bit of that sort of irony, those sort of nods to subculture. You kind of, it's the kind of name where, look, if you get it, you get it. You're part of the group. If you don't, we're not for you. And it might sound wrong, but that's fine. And so I think the difference with a name like that versus something like Phones for You, which just feels a bit gimmicky, is, as I say, it it doesn't feel like it's trying too hard for that audience. Whereas, yeah, as we've said, sort of Phones for You does a little bit, and yeah. So I think if you're trying, I mean, the interesting thing about tone is, understanding your audience. What are you trying to convey? Who are you trying to, engage with, and then trying to kind of match the name to do that. So, there are lots of other examples. I mean, there's a big brand, kind of a craft beer brand over here in the UK. It might actually be international now. In fact, as I'm saying this, I think it might be in the States now, called Brewdog.
Oh
Do you
yeah,
know
yeah, it's
Brewdog?
big here.
Yeah,
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 yeah.
okay, yeah, yeah. Um, you know, craft beer brand sort of draws on that sort of punk anti-establishment language. Brewdog, I mean, on the one hand, it sort of sounds a little bit down market if you're distance from it, but it just
Yeah,
has a
it
bit of
does. It
attitude.
does like old punks. Like they also, I don't drink, and they have their non-alcoholic beers have like fun names that I'm like, oh, it's kind of. I feel annoyed by how much I go. Oh, I like that name.
Yeah, yeah, it's quite,
They do,
yeah,
they
irritatingly
do
quite
a
good.
good
Yeah.
job. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um,
So,
that
so I think it's that. Sorry,
so
Kate. Yeah, I think it's that kind of knowingness, as much as anything. And I think cheap feeling names feel like they're trying to appeal to everyone. They end up being literal, maybe cheesy puns, phonetic spellings. It just feels a little bit outdated. Whereas if you really know your audience and you zone in on kind of their sort of motivations and kind of needs, then actually you can overcome that really really well through the tone of the name.
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to this has come up on so many of these interviews. Is just like the name feels true. Nasty Gal knows who they're creating stuff for. Someone wearing it and be like, yeah, I'm a nasty gal, or kind of
Mhm.
like there's some back and forth there that feels like it's brand, it's an invented thing, but it feels more honest. Whereas Phones for You doesn't really sound like it's trying to speak to you. They're just talking about what they do. This is what we're doing. We got phones
There's
for
no
you,
layers
and that
to it.
you is anybody question mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, so making those connections, I think, is one of the like easier said than done tricks of naming, but that is like kind of the one of the big tricks of naming is a name that's going to feel true to the people that you are trying to speak to.
Yeah, I think a really good name just it needs a little bit of layering. It needs a story behind it, and that story can be quite simple, but just a little bit of depth. And I think if you go too functional and descriptive, whilst it can be immediately understandable what you do, you then have to work harder in the other elements in terms of to build up that naming, but that meaning. But actually, naming, if you get it right, can do a lot of that work for you.
You carry a lot
Certainly
of
as
it.
that kind of initial hook.
So do you think, as you see other brands from outside the UK come into the UK, are there mistakes they make or just things you wish more global brands knew or considered about the UK market and its particularities?
Yeah, well, I think beyond the sort of obvious, particularly with sort of UK and US English and the challenges of spelling differences, if you're, a brand that might be interested in, something about centers, you've got a problem with the RE, ER, or flavors, color, that kind of thing. So there's obviously that consideration. There's a brand called Center Parks, which actually I don't think is a US brand. I think it's a European brand. It's kind of like holiday and kind of activity sort of villages, but it's spelt the American version of center, so ER, and parks is with a C instead of a K. And
Oh,
it sort of irks me slightly every time I see it
sure.
that just doesn't quite feel right. And it's all over the UK, just doesn't quite feel right. But that's probably there's a deliberateness about that as well. I think in the UK there's probably something around kind of cultural sensitivities mattering, and we go back to that sort of cheap or premium sound. And as I was sort of thinking about this and putting the report together, I think there can be subtle but quite real sort of sensitivities that sort of signal levels of premiumness or even sort of class. And so, you take a couple of examples. So a brand like Poundland, which is a high street retailer, it is a cheap retailer. It is deliberately cheap, but it's called Poundland, so everything's a pound. You think about Timberland coming in. I know it's not a UK brand, but structurally, as a name, Timberland, Poundland, they're exactly the same. It's
Interesting.
something land. You have a
Right.
qualifier in front of it, timber or pound. Both are descriptive. As I say, they follow the same structure, but evoke entirely different worlds. One much more aspirational, Timberland, one much less so. So if you're not careful, and I guess particularly if you're not a native English, you have to be careful about what you put together to make that sort of meaning feel appropriate for your brand. So I think there's something kind of around that which you know brands might miss or kind of overseas brands might miss. I think humor is the other thing. I think in the UK, I guess it's probably the same a little bit with the US. And I was thinking about this. There's some amazing kind of US brands like Liquid Death that I think is, hilarious as a water brand to call it something like that. It's high risk but high reward if you get it right. And I think going back to that edginess, actually, something like Liquid Death is great. But I think the UK loves a little bit of wit, a little bit of playfulness, as long as it doesn't feel like it's too try hard. And so, BrewDog does that a little bit, but one that I absolutely love. It's quite an old brand now, but it's in our report. I can't believe it's not butter. Of just why would you?
Is that a UK brand
You can
or is
say,
it
yeah,
from
that's it.
here?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's a.
I don't
Is that a
know.
you?
I don't
I
know. We equally love it here. Like it still
okay.
comes
Oh
up
well,
in
well
jokes and
maybe I.
culture in 2025 since I was a child. I can't believe it's not blank, and I'm assuming it's still on the shelves. Yeah, that's a crazy name that has stood the test of time.
It's ridiculous. It breaks kind of all the conventions of what you might say is gonna, but it's memorable. It's playful. I still talk about it. I don't buy the product, but I still talk about it probably 30 years on or
Yeah, that's
whatever.
interesting. I don't know anyone who buys the product. I've never seen it in a friend's refrigerator, but we all think about it a lot, and they must still have an audience for it.
Yeah, but I think there's plenty of examples in kind of the UK market brands which just have a bit of fun. Yo Sushi, which is casual dining brand, or Oatly, the sort of quirky sort of oat based milk substitute brand. The way they're named just has a bit of playfulness to it, and so I think British consumers tend to like that, and I think we're quite a tight market where you can get away with quite a lot if you really think about your audience and who you're tapping into, and sort of willing to have a bit of play, have a bit of fun with language, and inject some playfulness into your name. Then that can resonate really really well with the British audience, I think.
Yeah, I think you really do have to understand British humor, though. I don't know if you guys just as a blanket love all
Yeah,
jokes. Same here. I think that does require, partnership with people in the UK who can tell you if that's going to land or not. Because humor is always risky with brands. And we see, especially
yeah,
with social media, brands taking humor to a level that like previously would have been like, heavens no. Um,
yeah.
but I think it still definitely requires some partnership rather than just taking a big swing and hoping your joke really lands with people. It
Yeah,
can
as
go
I say,
so
like
wrong.
it's high risk, but the rewards are high as well if you get
Huge.
it right.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
you know, yeah, you need to be careful, handle with care.
And the last thing I'll talk about, and we've kind of
Mm.
touched on this throughout, is just our people mistaking English for English. We've talked about, UK slang is so different. We have different spellings of a whole bunch of words. My favorite being diarrhea. We spell that in very different ways.
Yeah,
Um, but that, if you're entering a new market, it's an English speaking market, asking, an English speaking colleague or friend or whoever, hey, does this mean anything bad to you? And they go, no, looks good, and thinking you are golden. I mean, even within the US, something that, we say here, I'm in the Northeast of the United States, probably really different than slang in the
mm.
South, on the West Coast. But also to mistake like US English for Canadian English, for UK English, for Australia, all the different Englishes around the world. And I think in the work that we do, we're constantly saying our Englishes mean different things, carry different associations, trigger
Yeah.
different cultural things. Um, and yeah, I mean, I don't really have a question as much as like we notice that all the time. And it's so important to look past your own assumptions about your own knowledge of English or one other person's knowledge of English when you're brand building for an English speaking market.
100%, and I think look, that's the value. Look, we talk a lot over email, don't we, in terms of sharing names and just getting a perspective on things. And actually, kind of wider language as well. I think it's invaluable that sort of that international, like the international kind of network and community that we've got relying on it, or whatever scenario you're in, being able to access something like that to check. Yeah, because you just never know. I mean, even in our studio now, sometimes when we do language checks, we'll ask around and go, look, is this just me who sees this, or does somebody
And you've got
else see
people
this?
who
And
are
sometimes you go,
younger
oh yeah,
in
like
your
it's
office, and
really
a young
obvious that.
person's like, "Whoa, yeah,
Yeah,
you need intergenerational checking, very important."
absolutely. Yeah, you know what? And I think that's getting more so, and maybe I'm noticing it more as I get older.
Same.
So
Uh,
tragic point. Yeah,
it's horrifying. You try and stay
yeah,
excited about what young people are saying, but at a certain point, you're just like, I feel this old. It makes me feel old. Um, Pete, one final question for you, and then we'll play
yeah.
a little game. Do you have like a favorite English name? Is there a name to you that just like captures the spirit of great naming in the UK that you want to share a little bit about what you like and why?
Yeah, I thought about this. I mean, it's really, really difficult, I have to say, because it's almost like sort of who's your favorite child that you just don't have one. What one that you can pull out? And so I was kind of going through all sorts of different names. I think actually I'm going to one that's on your side of the Atlantic around, which maybe on the surface doesn't necessarily sound the most inspirational, the craziest, or the most creative. But I think what I like naming wise is kind of almost effortless sounding names, but they have a really strong story and depth of meaning behind them, and that the meaning's there for you to uncover if you want it, but you can also understand it at a simple level as well. And so, as I was thinking about this, I think the name Alphabet for the Google parent company,
Yeah.
I think is actually really interesting. Okay, look, I know it's just a simple English word,
No, it's good.
and it comes with a caveat as well that most brands probably don't have pockets deep enough to secure a name like that before anybody comes to me asking for a name like that. But they've got it, and I think it's, as I say, it's deceptively simple but layered with meaning. Obviously, it's the collection of letters that represent language. I think I like the way that when the Google founders talked about it and launched it, they talked about, look, language is one of humanity's greatest innovations. We're all about innovation, and that's a fantastic way of looking at it. But it represents their company, a collection of companies. Just as the alphabet is a collection of different components. it's how Google indexes search. They talk about alphabet, that sort of return above, investment return above kind of the benchmark. There's lots of things going on in it that just go, but on the face of it, it seems so simple. And I think as a writer and a namer as well, it just appeals to me that I kind of go, look, the answer to everything that I've ever done and I'm ever going to do is contained in the alphabet. It's about how you manipulate it and move those kind of components about. And I think there's something beautifully complete about that as a name.
Yeah.
So that's one. I'm going to cheat a little bit and now have one other one because I
Go
came
on.
across this brand, very quirky alternative, which just really made me smile because I just thought, oh my God, there's a brand out there called that, and it's Sick Dog Wolfman. Do you know? They're an Australian ad agency.
Is it
Sick,
SICK?
sick,
Sick?
exactly as it sounds.
Sick
Sick Dog
dog
Wolf
wolf
Man.
man. Is there a story? Do you
Um,
know the story?
I only know the story insofar as it's just got bags of attitude and says, look, it sets an
Dude.
expectation of what you
Yeah.
what you expect with them. But it just goes like, look, let's just blurt it out. There's so much kind of Gen Z kind of attitude, personality. It's fun. It feels
It also feels
like
so Australian. I
it
would
does feel
expect the
quite.
most Australian people I've ever encountered in my life to be
You know
behind that.
what? It kind of does, but in a sort of slightly intangible way. But yeah, like, absolutely the reaction that I had. And so I just thought, wow, and there's some bravery there. And you just go, fair play. So, sometimes you
Mm.
get little gems like that as well.
I like that. I think that puts us both on a journey to figure out what is the UK and the US version of a sick dog wolf man. It's a good name. 'Cause it's 4 words long and I've got it memorized. I'll have no problem retaining that for later. Good find.
Yeah, and it's memorable, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So, as part of all of these interviews, I've been asking everyone to stump me with a statement in their native language, which has been really easy for everyone
Yeah.
because they speak languages I don't. I
Mm-hmm.
had Ignacy, who we think of as our Spanish speaker. He also speaks Catalan, so he gave me a statement in Catalan just because I speak
Right.
a little bit of Spanish. Totally stumped me. Had no idea what he said. We both speak English, so I have asked you to prepare something to stump me, perhaps in UK slang, perhaps maybe some kind of dialect that I don't know. So, Pete, what have you got for me?
Okay. So, well, look, again, I thought a bit about this. The temptation was to give you some Cockney rhyming slang, which presumably you've heard of, and that.
Yes, and actually, I was here's my sneaky bit. I was raised by a Scottish man who loves Cockney rhyming slang. So you
Oh,
might,
okay.
I
Okay,
might
well,
have got you by that.
I'm not going to give you any of that because I just thought that's too easy. So, for those who don't know, Cockney rhyming slang is basically using other words that rhyme with the word that you actually mean in order to mean it. So, apples and pears, stairs,
Yes.
dog and bone, phone, that kind of thing. But I thought that actually that's too obvious. So, I'm originally from the northeast of England, a place called Durham, which is not far from Newcastle. So, Geordie is the local dialect. Now, I don't have a Geordie accent. I've got a very faintly kind of northern accent, but I've kind of lost my northeastern roots. However, there is a whole other language up there that you can get into, and so I thought I've got two phrases that I thought I might try. I don't know whether we've got time for two.
Me
Shall
too.
I give
Me
you an
too.
easy one and then a harder one?
Yes.
Shall we try? Okay.
Okay.
So if you're talking about someone who maybe you've just met or you're talking about them, you might say something like, that lass is proper canny like.
Okay.
So
That
we'll start
woman,
there and then we'll get more difficult.
proper. That
If you
lass
need
is.
me to say it again,
Say it again, slower. Let's see.
that lass is proper canny like.
Okay. Totally with you until the last word. So that woman, a
Mm-hmm.
respectable woman that we really admire,
Absolutely. Yeah.
is proper. So maybe you're just saying like that woman's very attractive.
It could be attractive. It could just be she's really nice.
She's
That
really
that girl is
nice.
that
That's
girl is
so
really
nice.
nice.
Oh,
Like
that's so
canny is just
respectful.
like it can mean good. I mean, it's a sort of a generic good. So it's depending on the context. It's actually that girl is just really nice. So it could mean I'll try you. Seeing as you got that so easily, Caitlin, I'm
Okay.
going to
Okay.
give you something
Sort of.
slightly harder.
Okay.
So let me set the scene, a little bit of context. So imagine you're working on a building site. You might say something like, "Oh yeah, how are here?"
Okay. I'm going to need you to do that one again.
Okay. Hoya hama hawa hia.
Wow, I do. I'm gonna after this have you send me that written out. Don't spell it because I think that could give stuff away. But I'm very excited to see this written out because it's very soft and I like its rhythm. No idea what any of those words are though. I maybe there's a word home in it, and maybe you're saying I'm gonna build a home here, but that is just purely based on some not even a
No,
lesson.
I'm really sorry. I thought you were, I thought you might get it.
Don't
I
be
thought I
sorry.
needed to. I thought I needed to give you some context in terms of the building site. So the building site. So there's hoya hama hawa hia. Hoi is
Oh,
throw,
are you
pass.
saying the word hammer?
I am, yeah.
Oh,
But you don't
now
say
I hear
hammer.
hammer.
You say hammer, hammer.
Hama. Hama.
Hawa over here, here.
Oh.
So hoi a hammer, hawa here.
So are you
Throw a
saying
hammer.
throw a
Like
hammer over here?
pass me the hammer.
Pass me the hammer. Wow, I love the way that sounds. That's beautiful.
Now,
And
whether anyone would ever say that, yeah, it's probably debatable. But like in
I
terms
bet
of how
that's
kind of
been said. Yeah.
in terms of how kind of Geordie works, there's definitely hoi, there's definitely
Jordy.
hawa, and
Mhm.
there's with words which maybe are one syllable, there's an extra syllable thrown in there, like here.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Wow.
You did well on the first one there, so I've got it. Fair play. Credit
Sort
where it's
of.
due.
Just because I know the word last, and that opens up a whole world sometimes to just know one word.
Yep. Yep.
But as always, I think this game is a good example of not assuming you know what things mean by what they sound like. But also, it's a fun way to realize how much we don't know. We don't know about language. We got to ask somebody else. Um,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for this chat. It's always so good to talk to you. And thank
Likewise.
you, everyone, for listening. We will see you next time. Bye bye.
Thanks so much, Caitlin. Bye.
Thank you for listening. How the World Names is produced by me, Caitlin Barrett. Music is by Alex Kulik. Subscribe to our newsletter at wearenaming.substack.com and submit a question for a future episode. If you'd like to partner with us on a global naming project, visit wearenaming.com to find out more.